Hello, welcome back to another CPaaSAA talk. My name is Rob Curver. I'm the founder of the CPaaS Acceleration Alliance, and I'm here today with Dave Boddington of Infobip and Scott Warner of MobileSquared. Welcome, gentlemen. Really excited to have you guys here because we're going to talk about something that we don't often talk about, which is sort of rich messaging and the transition from more traditional messaging to rich messaging, what it means for the industry, for operators, for aggregators, for everybody basically, and for enterprises. But before we do that, I need to start with something, Dave, with you, because you guys announced the sponsorship of a Formula One team last week at your Shift event in Miami, and I'm a big fan of the Formula One. I stay home to watch the qualies. It's crazy, it's crazy. So congratulations with that, and tell a little bit more why Infobip thinks that's a great move.
So yeah, and great to kind of talk on the subject actually. So yeah, we announced the sponsorship with the MoneyGram Haas Formula One team as part of actually the Miami F1 event last weekend. We were actually at the same time, or the following week, we were holding our Shift event as well as a number of other events in Miami at the time. So it's really good timing and a fantastic event, or events, I should say. I think it's fair to say that, and as you'd expect, we find a lot of synergies between ourselves and the MoneyGram Haas team in general. I think we've had Sylvia, our CEO, has had probably lots of opportunities and suggestions for sponsorships for Infobip, and I think this one is probably one that really resonated. I mean, I think the tagline we're using is performance through innovation. Ultimately, whilst we work in very different worlds, there is a real cultural fit between ourselves and Haas. There's engineering excellence at the core. That's throughout F1, but we've always Infobip has always been positioned as a business of humble engineers. It was founded by 3 engineers, and engineering department is certainly the largest within our business. So very much there's a kind of a real synergy there, a real alignment. And ultimately, we both work in environments where performance is absolutely key. We have to deliver billions of interactions. They have to work in an environment where the billionth of a second mattered. So we definitely felt there's kind of like a shared DNA between ourselves and their selves. And I think from the conversations actually I had last week with the members of the board, there was a real kind of personal connection at the time, meeting the Haas team. So I think we're really excited about where it's going. I think it kind of says a lot about where Infobip is and where we want, where we are, and also where we want to be and where we see we're going. In terms of really being at the forefront, we've always, I guess, historically been the biggest company that a lot of people don't know. We have, we're now 3,500 employees. Next year we'll be 20 years old, with a kind of coming on and touching on 2 billion turnover as a business. So a real significant size. And I think it's important, and it's kind of touching on the subject of this conversation, really, as we're touching on those kind of richer, more engaging interactions. Messaging isn't just delivering a vast number of SMS messages. It's about providing real kind of interactions. I think that's really important for us, and to be perceived in that kind of space. But also importantly, it gives us the opportunity to demonstrate those capabilities for Haas themselves, and to really provide them with the capabilities to provide really engaging experiences for their fans and their followers. And Rob, I sincerely hope that in the very near future, you receive pre, during, and post-race RCS messages that we've delivered on their behalf.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I look forward to that, and I look forward to seeing them in action, of course. Scott, over to you. At MobileSquared, you've been tracking the messaging business for, I don't know, forever, before I was born, I think. And you've been in messaging for a long time yourself, in different projects, now at MobileSquared. So I think this is a great example of the evolution of the messaging world, basically, from simple sometimes one directional SMS notification things to all of a sudden it's about rich messaging and branded and secure and customer experience. So what do you see as MobileSquared? What do you see happening in industry this year?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Rob, MobileSquared, we're the leaders when it comes to market research, insight, and intelligence in the mobile messaging market. And over the last 15 years or so that we've been tracking the market, and if you look back at our data, it's been really interesting to look at the evolution where we've gone from, as you mentioned, the kind of straight one-way SMS termination through to two-way services, and now through to kind of all of these new rich services over various different channels. And obviously today we're talking specifically about RCS, but we've really been looking across the board at all the different channels available, whether that be WhatsApp or Viber or any of the other kind of regional messaging channels as well. And it's been interesting to see how not just the way a message is delivered has changed, but actually the way those channels are being used has changed. So if we talk about RCS, we haven't, within our data and our research, we're expecting RCS to double year on year for at least the next 5 years. So that takes it up to over $12 billion as a global market by 2029. And that's around, I think it's something around 900 billion messages at that point. So, all of our research and our forecasts are showing really strong growth in RCS, but we're also showing really strong growth in all the other channels as well. SMS a little bit less, I would say, and a little bit of a decline. But again, there's not going to be a huge hit on the SMS industry, because what we're seeing all sorts of new use cases come out of that. And I think Dave's one perfectly positioned to talk about this. And I think we'll go into how kind of enterprises choose channels. But our expectation is that overall, when you look at the messaging market as a whole, there's going to be really significant growth over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's driven by these rich channels. And it's less about that old kind of adage in messaging where we talk about cannibalization. It's not really about cannibalization. This is about new use cases and changes in technology. So yeah, we're really bullish about the market. If you look into our data and you look into our research, we see some really impressive numbers. And RCS is just one of those channels that's going to be leading that growth.
Okay, that sounds good. It's exciting, and a good question for Dave. So, with all these channels, how do enterprises choose? Do enterprises understand what's possible and available, or is that a role for aggregators or the Infobips of this world to help them? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a role for the ecosystem to a certain extent, because it's not just an aggregator role. It's a communication strategist role, it's a creative agency role, it's a comms planner role. So I think there's an awful lot of kind of parties within that mix to help define what's right. And there is no kind of black and white yes or no answer in terms of how do brands choose and what is the right answer for a brand, because it will very much depend on the market, their consumers, their use cases, and indeed the business themselves. So I think ultimately it's kind of as Scott and yourselves have touched on, the choice now is probably as rich as it's ever been. Dare I say there is a paradox of choice. I think there is a danger that a brand can try to do too many things over too many channels. So I think particularly where you're discussing with a brand, a business about moving into rich messaging or richer messaging, it's really much a case of understanding what you're trying to understand, what you're trying to measure. How are you identifying whether you're having success or not, but also being able to adapt and pivot, because nobody's getting it right first time. And realistically, even if you get it right first time, the market changes. I think we're in a really interesting time right now. And that's by right now in kind of macro terms, we're talking about maybe the next year, 18 months, 2 years. When you think about the availability of rich messaging and the capabilities, the feature set that provides, but they've kind of existed for a while. RCS isn't new; it's been around a long time. So why is it more interesting now? You layer on top of that the reach that you get with iOS coming into the game. You layer onto that the additional capabilities that things like network APIs, access to data, the additional capabilities that comes with a general shift to more kind of a conversation experiences, the capabilities that AI brings into that to make those conversational experiences more humanized and more efficient, and more relatable to consumers. And then also where consumers are in terms of their behavior and their expectations and their use of mobile, in a much which is very different from where they were even 2-3 years ago, particularly as you look at the kind of what were the younger generations kind of shifting into becoming kind of the consumer generation. I think we're at a really interesting point. There's a real confluence of factors here, which I say makes the next year, 12-18 months really, really interesting.
How do you measure then with all this complexity? I think in the old days, in my mind, for SMS, I mean, simple things like open ratio was a big KPI. I think, but what you're saying with rich channels and all these layers, it's probably more about ROI. It's an enterprise evaluating whether this makes sense at all.
Yeah, and I think that's you touch on it really nicely there, actually, Rob. I think dare I say it, however, open rates for SMS will never have accurately. There'll always be a lot of kind of guesswork around that for sure. But I think what rich channels allow us to do is shift the conversation away from cost into value. And you touched on it kind of right at the start in terms of where the SMS world is. It's a commoditized industry. It's about volume, it's about deliverability, it's about how many zeros after decimal point for the price, and that, so it's kind of hit it's anything in that sense. Richer messaging and RCS obviously kind of at the forefront gives the industry the opportunity to talk about value for the communications, value for the use cases. So as you say, it might be ROI. It might be return on ad spend. It might be about the number of engaged users. It might be the number of signed up users. But ultimately, you're talking about the effectiveness of the communication at the forefront rather than just what it costs and how quickly we can deliver it.
Yeah, and I think just to add in there, when you look into the use cases of RCS, it's a very different split compared to SMS. I mean, we know that SMS over the last number of years has been dominated by authentication, which is SMS is perfect for this kind of straight kind of deliver of a one-time passcode. There's a really kind of sensible use case there that makes sense. But when we talk about RCS, we see within our data, we see that 50% of the revenue from the RBM market comes from essentially customer care or utility. And then something around 35% of the market is then marketing, which is kind of like a fallen use case in the SMS market because of the way pricing went and the kind of let's call it the lack of creativity that's available in an SMS compared to within a rich
and also
message.
the misuse of the channel, let's be honest as well.
Correct. So there's loads of reasons behind it, but so what we see is a very different profile of use cases when we look at RCS versus SMS or other channels. Even WhatsApp has another different kind of, when you look at use cases and you look at the type of companies using these channels and how they use them, and what countries they use them in. It's really interesting. And we have, the granular data that shows a kind of really interesting picture of the market as a whole.
I like how you put that together and that transition. So we're looking at different buyers, different use cases, different players also. Let's touch on the operators a little bit, because of course RCS, one of the strengths of RCS is that it's an operator channel, which gives it certain security and privacy characteristics, let's say, compared to over-the-top platforms.
Yeah.
But it also means that you need to deal with these operators in, I don't know, 168 countries or something that we have on the globe, right? So there's a challenge there. And we're seeing the global rollout of RCS now, and different countries, different regions go at their own speeds. How did it work out for you at Infobip, Dave, that you're working with these operators? Are they helpful? Is a part of the success, or is it a struggle to get them to move along? How's that working out?
Well, I mean, I think you're right to highlight the benefits of being a carrier-owned channel. I think it brings significant benefits because of that, and that brings that level of reassurance, that confidence, the compliance, the regulation, etc. With every element of regulation, there's trust. There's also kind of a friction point that comes with that. That's inevitable, but it's necessary friction, I think, for the benefit of the channel. In terms of dealing with carriers, that dare I say it, that's Infobip's, that's our core kind of capability. We have, from an SMS perspective, we have direct connectivity with 800 plus carriers. We're kind of, our foundation is on establishing strong carrier connections and building on those. So I think in that sense, we find ourselves in a really strong positive position because of that. And actually we find ourselves often being that kind of almost first point of call for a carrier to discuss RCS and whether it's right for them, how to use it, and what the next steps are. It's a complex ecosystem. It's obviously, with the role of the GSMA, with Google, Apple, it is a more complex ecosystem than SMS would be, both technically and kind of commercially to a certain extent. So hence why we find that in terms of the kind of the market availability of the channel from a business messaging perspective, is kind of rolling out at a kind of more gradual pace. But I think there absolutely is good reason for that in terms of establishing the case, reaching that critical mass of messaging, of brands, of businesses. And I think we're really going to start to see, with the US very much warming up now and coming on board, North America in general, with Canada as well, that market rollout to continue to accelerate. And as I say, I think with carriers, it is a new paradigm for them. I think, going back to that point, carriers are used to owning the channel, owning the infrastructure, and it being a very commoditized product. So it is a new paradigm for them in terms of understanding what it means to them. What is the impact of rich messaging and rich messaging use cases going to mean for them in terms of their, and there is, I think it's, it's not giving away any confidence here, say there is kind of internal questioning, say, is this going to cannibalize our existing SMS or MMS revenue? And that's the legitimate concerns, and to a certain extent there will be. But I think touching on what Scott's already talked about is those new use cases, bringing in those use cases that aren't in the mobile messaging space whatsoever, outbound calling, email, push to web, where that might be a one-way SMS, but now that becomes a conversation experience with more traffic and hence more revenue over the mobile space. Mobile apps, there's an awful lot of mobile apps where the use cases absolutely can be replicated in rich messaging for a fraction of the costs, and dare I say it, to the pleasure of the consumers, because of that. So I think there's a lot of learning still to take place, but there's also a lot of learning having already happened within those markets, which we would consider more mature for RCS. So yeah, I think it's carriers are excited in general. There's always question marks, but I think on the whole, carriers are extremely excited about the opportunities that RCS can bring to them. Okay,
that makes sense. And then Scott, Dave already mentioned Google and Apple, some of the hyperscalers, the big global, the big five. How important are they to make RCS successful?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's more of a total ecosystem question, because RCS sits in this really unique position where it's somehow a telco product, but it's somehow a digital product. I think Dave comes from a really interesting background on your career history when it comes to kind of sitting in between those two things.
Yeah.
But I think what we see is many operators come from this, let's call it traditional telco world. And by the way, many SMS players come from that world as well, or messaging players, let's call them, that come from this kind of telco end of the industry. That RCS is a new way of thinking for them. Okay. So, what makes more sense is who are the new players that might sit in that ecosystem? So, sure, I think Google actually, even more over the last 12 months, they've made a lot of noise. They've supported a lot of the carriers. But here in Germany, I'm based in Munich, RCS is really making some big strides now, not just on the connectivity side, but because the ecosystem works together. So all of the operators in Germany, and Dave, you can probably go into some other countries, but my experience in Germany says the operators are keen and pushing hard. Google is making real efforts in the market as well to support that kind of education piece. And the players, when you talk about Infobip or companies like Native Message or others out there, they're all making some noise in the market as well. So what really has to happen is that everyone has to be kind of singing off the same hymn sheet, if we want to use that cliche. And where we see markets where that happens, there's some really successful use cases, and that's where the growth is going to see. We see over the next 5 years, there's going to be core markets. It's going to be Germany, and then it's going to be the US, India, Brazil, these big markets. So actually the growth over the next 5 years doesn't have as much of a challenge when we talk about the 2,000 mobile operators around the world, because actually you need to just capture these really big markets first, and then the other operators will all follow that in. Because what I see from our operator conversations when you talk to smaller operators is their opinion is wait and see. So I think, it's just a unique product, and it's about kind of tying that all in.
I kind of wanted to, sorry, Rob, just to kind of underscore that point that Scott brought up earlier there, in terms of where carriers work in a collaborative way, that has a significant impact of the success of the channel in the market. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We see that in other markets as well, where the carriers are collaborating, working together, and that's from communicating it to the market, but also in terms of events. Germany, a really good example. They have a single website that is contributed to by all the carriers for the single source of information around the channel. But also then commercially, and of course, they absolutely can't discuss price points for competition reasons, but having a consistent position around what are the pricing models is really important as well, to enable us to take then that channel to market and minimize the kind of questions and complexity there. So I totally agree with Scott's point there, that it has a significant impact on the kind of the success of go to market of the channel within a given market.
That's interesting. So I'm in Amsterdam, and I'm still waiting for RCS to get launched in the Netherlands at some point. And all the operators keep telling me they'll do it next quarter. And I think they're all waiting for each other to be the first. I think it will be cool. I like your. I'm also thinking of the way you describe it, Dave. It's similar to what we're seeing with network APIs now. It's a very similar market rollout, I think. The larger market starting and then showing the possibilities, and the smaller countries following. So one final question, because we made it for 24 minutes in this conversation without talking about AI, which is a record for all the sessions I recorded this year.
I mean, I might have referenced it earlier. I should be forgiven for that.
Okay, well, in that case, we'll cut that out. So just to make that point. And you mentioned earlier, Dave, that the next 12 to 18 months will be very, very important to see how RCS is really going to continue this growth and this rollout, and how everything's coming together. Now, if we add AI to the picture, which is on a similar but very fast curve of rollout, everywhere. So when you think about campaigns and messaging journeys, I think there's going to be a huge role for AI once it's good enough, right, to sort of take care of a lot of the stuff that's now manual. So looking ahead at 2025, 2026, right, end of or middle of next year, let's say, where do you think we will be as an ecosystem, as an RCS ecosystem, and what do you think? So what do you think success would look like for, let's say, the entire ecosystem?
So I think, as a starting point, if we're kind of achieving those bullish projections that Scott referenced MobileSquared are making in terms of that doubling, that year-on-year doubling, I think that's a good place to be. So if we're on track for that, that 900 billion messages, then the ecosystem's in a good place. But I think, and maybe it's more of a subjective measure than an objective one. But I think looking at the nature of messaging, I think in truth, and we'll probably, I think from experience, and I think we'll see this replicated to a certain extent, certainly among the first kind of, or the next wave of markets. We generally see a number of waves in terms of brand adoption of RCS. First traffic you see is pick and shift, like for like. I'm doing this via SMS, and the likes of ourselves facilitate that, absolutely, because we want to allow brands a really nice, easy on-ramp into the channel. And so that would be, right, your existing traffic, we will auto upgrade that, whether it be SMS or MMS. So there's no real kind of change to the use case, but it's moving traffic into the channel. So there's brands are starting to see their logos in users' inboxes, which, believe it or not, has a significant input. When an executive sees that, they love it. And that shouldn't be overestimated, the power of just seeing that logo in an inbox.
And when they see their competitor, they
exactly
take action.
Exactly that. And dare I say it, with iOS rolling out and most executives using iOS, you're going to start to see that effect even more. The second wave is a longer wave, but potentially a much higher one, and that is then what we've been talking about that the new use cases, the value-based use case, whether it be conversational use cases, we'd be extending those existing use cases into more engaging experiences, more measurable experiences, more mobile experiences. I think that's really, so if we start to see the ecosystem moving towards that, or actually not moving towards, maybe that's probably the wrong way of putting it, is maybe it's more bringing in more of those use cases. I think that for me would start to be success. That still will be probably the minority of traffic, but it's important because it's that move of the ecosystem into those kind of use cases, those kind of traffic, and really aligning to where consumers are. We did talk about kind of referenced earlier in terms of how AI can help with those conversations, really humanizing a conversation experience. So I'm not asking for something, then getting a question back, then answering that question, then getting another question back. But if we can make the mobile experience, record a voice note and send it in, which can then be recognized with then a shortcut of options for what shoes I want to buy, really making that much more like walk into a shop and asking the staff there. Just taking that as an analogous experience but to do it on mobile. That maybe won't happen in volume in the next 18 months, but starting to see that kind of experience, I think that would be a success for me. And I say it's maybe more subjective than objective, but I think that's really where we want to see the industry going and where it has the opportunity to go.
Yeah, cool. Scott, final words for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dave hit the nail on the head when we want to look at not just the kind of transition of certain traffic from one channel to another, but when we look at new use cases, there's a huge question around enablement. So we have let's say the infrastructure and the foundation in place when we talk about connectivity, but the question is, how do we actually enable a customer to use that in an effective way? Yeah. So we talk about all these brilliant use cases, but actually until you've got the right software and tools available, to enable your customer to implement those use cases, because it's great that this channel can support so many different things, but you need to be able to do that at scale. And we see that there's a small handful of players at the moment who are doing that and enabling that at scale, but there's a whole load of other players who are not at the moment. So there's a real kind of, from what I see, a gap that's slowly being filled when it comes to the enablement side. And I think the next 12 months we'll see that as the real focus, because the connectivity piece is on its way, if you want to put it that way. The technology exists, people know how to roll it out. The problem that we have is that gap between, and we go back to the gap between telco and kind of digital enablement. That gap.
And I think that's, you've hit the nail on the head there, Scott, because I think that's also where the benefit of the value-based experiences becomes really, really important, because those businesses that we want or have the opportunity to engage in more conversational, richer experiences, they have any number of legacy platforms they're already using that are probably just pumping out SMS messages, and it's a cost on their bottom line. So to whether that be to move to a new technology, a new platform provider, or to, if it's in-house built, to do the work to update it, or to convince their vendor that they need to engage in these experiences, ultimately they need to see the benefit in doing so, because that's investment. So once you start to, we start to build up that body of evidence, that catalog of use cases that demonstrate the value, that's when you start to see those brands and they being kind of increasingly able to take on those experiences, because they're making those changes to their platforms, or their vendors are making changes to those platforms. So yeah, it's one thing, as Scott's absolutely right, it's one thing having the connectivity, it's another thing being able to use it.
Okay, great. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It was very enlightening. I enjoyed this conversation. I look forward to talking more about RCS and AI and all of that stuff at our CASA 25 event in September. I hope to see you both there. And otherwise, we'll talk about this. Let's agree to talk again in 3 or 6 months anyway, to see where the industry is going then. Absolutely. So thank you very much.
No worries.
Thanks, Rob.